Hey, what's going on? It's Craig again, coming at you solo, talking about some social intelligence stuff. Um, I wanted to go over an article that I saw the other day and wanted to read over it, kind of see the findings, and talk a little bit more about that in context of social intelligence. Um, here, the article in question was talking about this new experimental study that demonstrates why social dominance matters for understanding psychopathology. What does that even mean? Well, I found the actual study, and uh, the study is called Social Dominance and Multiple Dimensions of Psychopathology, an experimental test of reactivity to leadership and subordinate roles. So, what they did was they found how being put into a leadership role or a subordinate role can affect somebody based on their own psychopathology. If they have depression, if they have anxiety, if they have other factors, if they, other psychopathologies. And so, the background, the theory and research suggests that social dominance is important for multiple forms of psychopathology, and yet few studies have considered multiple dimensions of psychopathology simultaneously, and relatively few have used well validated behavioral indices. So, this is something that hasn't been researched too much. In fact, I mean, there is a lot of research on the concept of social dominance in the view of behavior science. But what is social dominance? Well, we look at social dominance as something that's basically a hierarchical structure, right? Anytime you enter into a social interaction, you're entering into a hierarchical structure. You are entering into a social hierarchy. We experience levels of social status in different ways with people. When you're with your best friends, you are the highest status person, right? Everybody around you respects you. You're having a good time. You can be comfortable and open right there, right? But if you walk up to a group of strangers and start a conversation, they don't know your social status, and therefore you enter into a hierarchical structure or a social hierarchy where you have to define where you are at, and that definition is defined, or the level of status that you have is defined by how you act in that moment. So if you're very comfortable, you're going to show higher status. They're going to accept you as higher status. If you're very timid, if you're subordinate, if you're showing that you're afraid, it lowers your status. So because the research is all over the place with this, right? They don't really have a specific one dimension that you can just test to talk about social dominance, um, because it's more of an ethereal idea, right? It's what is dominance. I know I know how far I can jump if I measure it, right? If I try to do a long jump, you can measure it with a yardstick or a ruler, or something like that. But with social dominance, that's something that's pretty can seem pretty subjective, right? It's something that you can't necessarily measure with the naked eye. So there's a bit to be explored in this field when it comes to this idea of social dominance. And I really don't like the term social dominance, because with a hierarchy is about leadership and followers. Leaders and followers, it doesn't necessarily mean I'm dominating over you. It doesn't mean that I'm forcing you into something. That's what I think of when I think of the word dominance. Dominance is more kind of aggressive. But okay, so what they did was they, as most studies in psychology and behavior science, most studies are with college students. Um, that this is the bias that we have to work with in the scientific community, because most people who are willing to participate for a free lunch or $20 are going to be the students, and what they have the researchers have access to students on campus, right? So we use well-validated experimental approach of assigning participants to a leadership and subordinate position. So they use something, some sort of method to expose people to subordinate and leadership positions in this experiment. Okay, we examined how self-rated severity of depression, social anxiety, manic tendencies, and psychopathy relate to psychophysiological and affective reactivity to this role. So the participants in the study, these college kids in this study were self-rating on how anxious they were, how socially anxious they were, how much depression they had, if they had other tendencies, other psychopathologies, and they did some sort of questionnaire, I'm assuming, and they measured that with physiological effects. What they ended up doing was they hooked them up to a thing that measured their breath and their sinus. There's something about their sinuses, and I think a heart rate indicator as well. Okay, so consistent with hypothesis, manic symptoms related to more discomfort in the subordinate role. So if you are more manic, you probably don't like being subordinate compared to the leadership role, as evidenced by more decline in positive affect, more discomfort, and a larger RSA decline. What is RSA? I think that is one of the things that they measured. While depression symptoms related to a more positive response to subordinate role. So people who are depressed like not being in a leadership position, or they prefer being in a leadership, they prefer being in a subordinate position to a leadership position, including more positive affect and more comfort in the assigned role. Social anxiety was related to discomfort regardless of the assigned role. So if you have social anxiety, putting yourself into a situation where you feel there is a bit of a hierarchy can be hard, can be stressful on you. And those with higher psychopathy symptoms did not show differential response to assigned roles. So that's good, right? Somebody who's a psychopath isn't going to have a response, or maybe there's not enough data for that. So limited by mild symptoms, absence of hormonal data. Ooh, they could have gotten hormonal data. So the conclusions, the findings provide novel transdiagnostic evidence for the importance of social dominance to differentiate diverse forms of psychopathology. Okay, so this is the abstract of this. There's a whole, they have articles, the whole 9 yards. If you want to read about it, just look this up. It's by Sherry L. Johnson. But here's the article that I wanted to talk about. Basically, they said they summarized what was in the article. So what they had the participants do was they told them that they were going to do a test on being able to read somebody's personality based on looking at their eyes. So this was the dupe. This was the red herring. So they would be tested on whether or not they got this right. And then they put them in a room with another person, and that other person was secretly one of the researchers. And they told them, you will be assigned a leadership position based on whether or not you got a higher score, basically. So they randomized it, and they made it so that the people who the participant was in with somebody who was on the inside, and randomly they would either say, participant, you are the leader, you get to sit in a nice big comfy chair while the other person sits in a cold metal folding chair, or they switched it and they said, all right, participant, you're going to be the follower and the other person's going to be the leader. They're going to sit in this nice big comfy chair and you get to sit in this cold metal folding chair. I think it's kind of weird that like the people didn't really notice that like this is totally set up. But maybe that's me meta analyzing it and going thinking that I wouldn't act the same way in that position. So what it ended up happening is they got them into these leadership positions, and I'm assuming that that's what they were talking about when it was this validated way of putting people into a leadership role. It's like, hey, let's get you. You're going to be the first to go. You're going to be the one who's leading this interaction, and you're also going to be sitting in this nice, comfy chair. um, and so what they did was they measured. Okay, during the study, each participant was hooked up to an electrocardiogram, ECG, and that measured respiratory sinus arrhythmia, a physiological indicator of distress. So that's what they were measuring if this person was feeling in distress. The responses to the mood questionnaire. Oh, and then they had a mood questionnaire afterwards. So the responses to the mood questionnaire and the electrocardiogram recordings both provided evidence that social dominance matters for understanding psychopathology. So perhaps most clearly, here's the quote, perhaps most clearly, people who had a history of mild manic symptoms showed psychopathological and physiological discomfort when assigned to be in a subordinate role. People who had experienced depressive symptoms were uncomfortable when assigned to be in a leadership role. So this is interesting because we can then take notice of this if you know your own psychopathology, right? If you're anxious or if you're depressed, where you feel discomfort, right? So as somebody who is manic, I'm manic. I used to be very hypomanic. So somebody who's manic can feel anxious when they're in a subordinate role. For me, I don't know. I don't like being told what to do. So that makes a lot of sense. I would feel kind of anxious in that type of role. But as a leader, you feel a little bit less distressed. As somebody who has anxiety, though, somebody who has anxiety is less likely to feel, to feel good in a leadership role because they feel like there's pressure upon them and they want somebody to tell them what to do or to take the lead so that they can ease up on that responsibility is what I'm assuming, right? But taking note, this is a tendency. This is not your fate, right? We can get used to working on being out of our comfort zone. We can work on being in that subordinate role. We can work on being in that leadership role and understanding status a little bit better than that this person is dominating me. I don't like that. I don't like that term because it assumes that that person has power over you, and nobody has power over you. Somebody might be higher social status than you on the hierarchy, right? They might be somebody who's more comfortable, somebody who has more abundance, somebody that other people are attracted to more, but it does not relate to you, right? It's not a zero sum game here where if somebody else has status, if somebody else is well respected, that you can't be. It's all about understanding that everybody is wired. We're evolved around leadership and followers. If everybody was a leader, then none of us would get anything done. If everybody was a leader, there'd be like 12 different people, every time you tried to go on a road trip, everybody in the car would be like, okay, you got to go this way. You got to go this way. No. I want to eat at this place. I want to eat at that place. And you would never get anything done. You would just fight all the time. But we have this tendency to want to follow because, right, we get more stuff done if everybody's going in the same direction. And so, this idea of dominance, I really I really want to get it out of the conversation, I guess, when it comes to like social interactions and human behavior. Obviously, this is a technical term right now, that we're talking about. This is why, like, at Jaunty, we don't talk about dominance. We don't call it dominance. Anyways, so I really thought that was an interesting, new step forward in this and this understanding of how people interact in a social environment or in a social hierarchy, and where they are based on their predilections, right? Based on if they're anxious or manic or have some sort of other issue, right? And a lot of the people who come to Jaunty, the gym for social skills, a lot of people who come to us are actually socially anxious, or they have general anxiety. And so this helps me to understand how to, how to serve them better, because I know what type of situation they're going to feel more anxious in, right? If I volunteer somebody to speak in front of the class, I know that it's going to up their tension. But a little bit of my class is about upping the tension so that they can get used to it. That's the dialectical behavioral therapy piece. So thinking about that, I think, it's not your fate. You can always get around it. So before I go, I did have one other thing I wanted to talk about, and it's TikTok. Obviously, my favorite social media platform. Dana Rose Carney, the Berkeley professor who talks about human behavior, has something to say about the rules, the social rules, with people who are wealthy versus people who are not. And so here, let me fill this up. Oh, let me. Just realized I might not have the audio on. Yeah. Okay.
People higher on socioeconomic status, they are less engaged in social interaction. They'll doodle more. They'll, do things like look away or not be as engaged with you in a conversation. They'll, not nod their head. They won't laugh at you. They'll engage in more grooming behavior. So what's super weird about this is that grooming, right, is a sign of anxiety, and not being engaged makes people think you're less smart. So kind of interesting, right? So you have this set of behaviors that you should be doing, right? Because it sends the signal like, oh, I'm really smart, oh, I'm really engaged. But at the same time, when we look at the link between socioeconomic status, higher SES people engage in fewer engagement behaviors. I'm Dana. I study nonverbal communication. Bye. So here.
All right. So interesting. A lot of the time we talk about social status from the perspective of this, what we call external social status. And external social status is the wealth, the money, right? So, looking at it.
Here's a weird nonverbal finding. People hire on.
Okay. Share my sound. Okay. So here's how I differentiate it. So we got right here, we got two pillars of social status. Maybe I can move that a little bit. Okay, two pillars of social status. On one side, we've got external social status. Right. External status is on this one side, and on the other side, we've got internal status. And people who have external status, this is the traditional social status stuff that we think of. It's money, it's material wealth, right? It's your the clothes you wear, but it's also things like associations, right? What school did you go to? Where do you live? What community do you live in? Do you have an iPhone or an Android? Your titles, right? Are you the king? Are you the queen? The duke? Are you a VP at your company? Right? Your accolades, What have you accomplished? What medals have you gotten? What trophies have you received? But then there's other stuff too, right? There's your culture. Are you from the Ivy Leagues, or are you a home country boy? Are you somebody who's uh, from from the middle of nowhere, and are you a hillbilly? I actually talked on my TikTok yesterday about the difference between northern and southern China, in that in China they have a saying that people in the south drink tea because tea helps them think more and be they're they, it helps them calm themselves and think more. And in northern China they drink alcohol, which makes them feel like kings, and so they make bad decisions. And the adage is that people in the south are wealthy because they drink tea, versus people in the north who are poor because they drink alcohol, which I think is a load of bullshit, because um, there's lots of other contributing factors to wealth in the south of China, mostly warm water ports and economic trade. And that's where wealthy people tend to congregate in the first place. And secondly, people in northern China don't have really hard lives, and so they use alcohol to cope. It's much like 18 and 1900s Russia, under Tsarist Russia as well as Soviet Union, where people would drink a lot, and that's where this alcohol problem came from in Russia, um, because it was also state sponsored too. I don't even want to get into that, but um, anyways, the culture is very different in depending on where you are, and you may have a certain level of status, right? If I say I'm from Tennessee, and I'm talking to somebody who's in New York City and they've lived in New York City their entire lives, they might think a certain way about me, and they might think I'm some sort of a hick or something like that, right? And that's an external status factor. But other external status factors are things like your genetics, right? How tall are you? What color is your skin tone? What color are your eyes, your hair? Do you have any specific diseases? What's your sex, right? And the cool thing about this status stuff is it's really relative. I could be here and have all this stuff that I have and have a level of status, but then I go to, I don't know, I go to the middle of like Pakistan, and I'm going to have a very different level of status. And so it's so relative to the people, right? As I mentioned before, anytime you enter into a social situation, you're entering into a social hierarchy, and you have a chance to prove where you're at socially in that moment. Now, I don't really care about this stuff. I don't really care about this external status stuff. What I care about is, all the stuff that we work on at Jaunty, and that's this internal status stuff. This is things like, your confidence levels, your skill sets, right? Your social skill sets. Do you have the ability to approach a stranger? Do you have the ability to have a great conversation? Do you have the ability to empathize with somebody and make them feel good? And your beliefs, really grounded in your beliefs, right? If I see you on the street and I want to have a conversation with you, if I believe that it's a totally weird thing to go up to you and have that conversation, it's going to sound something like this. Excuse me, I'm sorry. Sorry to bother you. I just wanted to talk to you for a second. Yeah, can you talk for a second? Versus thinking it's a totally normal thing to do, which it is. And, people want to talk to new people. People want to meet strangers as long as you have good intentions, right? So I might have this belief, and this is how I might sound if I have that belief. Hey, how's it going? Two very different experiences, from excuse me, sorry to bother you, to hey, what's up? So thinking about that, I care about the internal status stuff, but people who have high socioeconomic status, that's external, right? And so they're used to people liking them for what they have rather than who they are. And therefore they might be a little bit less engaged, right? As Dana says, they're probably less engaged socially. They're not that, they're a little anxious, they're playing with their hair, they're not really paying attention. And part of that is in a bit of aloofness, right? And sometimes that can be attractive, right? If I'm spending all my attention on you, if you were to spend less attention on me than I am on you, you definitely have the status. You definitely have the power there. But so I'm assuming that I'm not a wealthy person, but I'm assuming that with wealthy people, they probably get a lot of attention. And so therefore they've adapted this behavior of being less engaged because they want to give their attention to somebody who really values it. And this is a subconscious thing, who really values it, but who is a valued, who creates value that they want to engage in. And so even external high status people are still, create these behaviors of kind of avoidance until there's something that engages them, and that creates a bit of social status. But yeah, at the same time, they're also used to people liking them for what they have. And so they're not really used to engaging socially, engaging emotionally with somebody. And therefore, they don't have the high internal status a lot of the time. But you know what? A lot of high external status people also have high internal status. And a lot of people got to that external status because they have a high internal status, right? So it's important to look at things with a grain of salt, and kind of understand that there is a bit of a gradient here in shades of gray, to understand there's lots of factors here, and it's a complex topic to really understand. But I love Dana Rose Carvey, as you know, or Carney, sorry. uh Sorry, Dana, I got your name wrong. But yeah, I love her stuff, and keep, as long as she puts out TikToks, I'm probably going to share them with my Jaunty community. So anyways, that's all I got for today. I hope you appreciated the conversation, the discussion on the topic. My question for you today is about social anxiety, and that this specific this research paper that came out, right? How do you feel when you're put into a leadership position? Do you feel good? Does it make you anxious? And does that correlate to, or how does that correlate to your psychopathology? Are you anxious? Are you an anxious person? Are you a manic person? Are you a depressed person? Tell me in the comments, and engage with me a little bit more online at gym.jaunty.org if you want to join the community. Thanks, and have a great rest of your day.